It's no secret that many dwarf fans are unhappy with the current state of the DAWI in Total War Warhammer 3.
In one word, how would you describe it?
Disappointing.
Despite receiving 2 previous race updates, the dwarfs feel like they've been getting the short end of the stick since 2015.
Short?
They are the definition of vanilla and unexciting gameplay. Now that's not a condemnation of Creative Assembly or their skills as developers. Their updates to the games through DLC and race reworks have gotten progressively better, pretty much with everyone in my opinion. And recently they asked for players' input on what we would like their rework to look like. So here are the concepts that I think a potential dwarf rework needs for the upcoming Thrones of Decay DLC due out this winter. First is reclaim the Karaz Ankor. Second is Karaks, the fortress cities of the deep. Third is the Underway, underground superhighways. And fourth, last of all, is Grudges. If you end up enjoying this video and my proposals within, please consider subscribing to the channel for more Total War and Warhammer content. When it comes to the DAWI, their lore is all about trying to restore their lost empire known as the Karaz Ankor. This mountain kingdom originally spanned the entire World's Edge Mountains, and even several places beyond that. It was made up of huge subterranean fortress cities known as Karaks, all of which were connected by a network of underground highways known as the Underway. Shortly after the War of Vengeance against the Elves, their empire was unexpectedly racked by massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions which heavily damaged their Karaks and the Underway. The ensuing chaos left the dwarfs isolated from one another and extremely vulnerable to invading greenskins and Skaven. Many of the greatest dwarf holds were lost, captured by enemies or ruined altogether. The dwarf empire was shattered. In the thousands of years since then, the dwarves have dreamt of restoring their lost empire, and have begun that quest under the leadership of High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer. One by one, they will reconquer their lost strongholds, and restore the tunnel network of the Underway. So to start off, let's talk about retaking the Karaz Ankor. Despite their diminished power since the collapse of their empire, the dwarves stubbornly have never given up hope of reclaiming their former glory. The dwarf army books tell us that within the stony heart of every dwarf there resides a deep-set and burning desire to reclaim their lost kingdom. And yet, almost nothing of this race-defining quest is really represented in the Total War Warhammer series. Beyond a few unique landmarks, there's no real incentive when playing as the dwarves to reclaim lost dwarf strongholds. Thoric, of course, is an exception to that. So what I would like to see is a mechanic I call the Glory of the Karaz Ankor, where retaking a lost Karak unlocks major rewards both for campaign and battles. A list of potential rewards for recapturing a hold could include things like Ancestor God relics that could be reused from the Chaos Dwarf Realm of Chaos campaign, powerful technologies unlocked by controlling a specific Karak, so that's in the same vein of Kislev's technologies which are related to their major cities. They could also get unique regiments of renown, so think of like the Electric Counts or Ikit Claw's unique workshop units. Similar to the Magic Forest and Deep Roots of the Wood Elves, this mechanic would have an interactive map that points out all the Karaks across the world on the campaign map, sort of like the Cathay Caravan interface. This map will come up again later once we start discussing the Underway. The next idea we're going to explore, however, is the Karaks and how the dwarves should build tall instead of wide. Karaks, also known as dwarf holds, are famously massive cities carved into the very rock beneath a mountain. They can encompass areas of many miles and have multiple levels. Only the greatest cities of other races could compare to even the smallest Karaks. Essentially, each hold is its own small kingdom. But currently in Total War Warhammer 3, the dwarf Karaks have nothing special about them and are just ordinary settlements. We do, however, have some existing examples of what the major dwarf holds should look and play like. Wood Elf Magical Forests and the dark fortresses of the Warriors of Chaos. I think for the dwarfs, Karak should function as a combination of both of these. Like the dark fortresses for the Warriors of Chaos, Karaks would appear as unique settlements when playing as the dwarves. And just like the magical forests of the Wood Elves, they would only be capable of reaching their full potential when controlled by their creators. On a gameplay level, that should mean Karaks are larger slot settlements for the dwarves. All Karaks would have 10 building slots, and then the greatest dwarf holds, Karaz Karak and then Karak 8 Peaks, have 12 building slots each. Another important aspect of Karaks is that they are also fortresses. And while sieges in Warhammer 3 are not great at the moment, I would like to see Karaks be extremely difficult to take over. That could include things like large quality garrisons similar to racial capitals, increased defensive supplies, and I think most important is immunity to siege attrition, at least for a turn. To balance out the potentially huge power of Karaks, dwarf minor settlements would be limited to mountain climates, and regions outside of that would only be available for outposts. I think this is justified because like the Wood Elves, dwarves are more concerned with territory that they think belongs to them, and they don't really settle outside of that territory. With that said, let's move on to the Underway. While each individual Karak was a small kingdom unto itself, the Dwarf Empire as a whole was so powerful because of its interconnected nature, courtesy of the Underway. This vast network of subterranean highways once connected almost every part of the Karaz Ankor, both big and small. It facilitated the trade between Karaks, allowing the dwarf kingdoms to become rich beyond the wildest dreams of other races. It also allowed armies to move large distances quite quickly by avoiding difficult terrain on the surface, allowing any part of the Dwarf Empire to be reinforced much quicker than normal. But as mentioned at the start of the video, the Underway is currently in a state of severe disrepair, as well as being infested with Skaven and Greenskins. Despite this, clearing the Underway of enemies and repairing it is a top priority for the dwarfs. They know that with its restoration, the current isolated power of the various dwarf kingdoms can once again be combined into a far more formidable force. So as to how the Dwarf Underway can be represented in gameplay for the dwarves, my idea is that it would become a superhighway, allowing the player to quickly transport an army from one Karak to another just like the Wood Elves through the Deep Roots. But as mentioned before, the Underway is currently full of enemies, which means that before any dwarf can begin to use it for its benefits, it has to be cleared of foes. Borrowing from the Wood Elves' rebirth rituals, once a Karak would be in the player's control and reaches a certain tier, a ritual can be initiated where encounters with enemy armies will appear near the Karak. These can be dealt with before they appear in Underway battles, just like the rebirth rituals, which would result in facing weaker enemies, but if you leave these alone and don't deal with them, they're going to spawn much stronger armies, hell-bent on destroying the Karak. Once that ritual is successfully completed, fast travel to and from this hold will be unlocked through the Karaz Ankor map. This process would apply to each Karak, with the network expanding once its local section of the Underway has been cleared. However, I would like the Underway to still have a chance of random battles or invasions happening while using the fast travel, because the Underway is never cleared permanently of enemies. As the global amount of Karaks under the player's control grows, faction-wide bonuses would be granted, with things like increased trade profit, growth and recruitment bonuses, reduced chance of being intercepted while using the Underway stance. And I think a cool thing would be to add like a battle ability to summon reinforcements when you're in friendly territory. Grudges are an integral part of who the dwarfs are as a race, and consequently are supposed to be a race-defining mechanic in the Total War Warhammer series. Because after all, dwarves never forgive and they never forget. At the moment though, Grudges as a gameplay mechanic feel disappointing, to say the least. They don't provide any meaningful choices or challenges that the player has to make or adapt to. And the penalties and rewards of the Grudge Severity meter don't really hinder or benefit the player enough to make it worth paying attention to. You can kind of just do whatever you want still and it's not going to affect you too bad. Another part of that problem is the generally lackluster rewards that most Grudge missions offer. Overall, Grudges in their current form are an extremely uninteresting carrot-stick system. To be honest though, I had a hard time thinking of improvements that could be made for this mechanic. So if you have ideas, please leave them in the comment down below, and also on like the Total War forums. But one way many others, and myself now, are suggesting that Grudges can be made more compelling is through the addition of Ancestral Grudges. These are the worst and oldest crimes against the Dawi, the ones that truly get their blood boiling. So avenging them would include things like defeating Malekith the Oathbreaker, wiping out major Chaos Dwarf factions, and like reclaiming lost dwarf artifacts. The point of these Grudges is to offer long-term goals for a campaign. In-game, these would be shared between all dwarf legendary lords and be included in the Great Book of Grudges at the start of every campaign. They would give out huge rewards once they have been struck out. And in my mind, significant rewards means things like confederation with other dwarf factions, especially major dwarf factions, permanent and temporary faction-wide bonuses like increased combat stats and maybe experience gain against specific races, powerful magic items that grant army-wide bonuses. And I also think, just like the Glory of the Karaz Ankor, I think some Grudges should reward regiments of renown. Overall, I want striking out Grudges to feel like the dwarf race is gaining momentum in their quest to right wrongs, because that's a big thing talking about Thorgrim once he becomes king, is that he's trying to maintain the momentum of keep striking out Grudges so the dwarfs can kind of get fired up and stay fired up. We've come to the last portion of the video where we're going to talk briefly about gripes I have with other dwarf mechanics. Talking about dwarves when it comes to battle, they're known for their heavily armored infantry that fight in a tight formation known as a shield wall. Now this is a historical tactic used by infantry too, but for them it means that they have such a tight defense that their battle lines are incredibly strong, capable of holding off charging enemies and extremely resistant to enemy missiles. In game, however, this is only represented by a charge defense against large. So I would like the introduction of a unit ability or a formation, similar to the dig-in ability introduced with the Chaos Dwarves. That one gives us bonuses after the unit is stationary for a short while. This would upgrade their innate charge defense against large into expert charge defense, which gives charge defense against all. I'd like to see them get increased melee defense and then increased missile resistance too. but as soon as you start moving your units around, they lose that bonus until they're braced again. Oath Gold, it becomes useless pretty quickly, so maybe something similar to the green skin scrap mechanic to better represent the rune system from Tabletop. Because in Tabletop, you could basically equip all your units with runes and not just the banners that we get right now. Last of all, I'd like to see an updated tech tree just to make it a little bit more easy to digest, because right now it's just really overwhelming and it takes too long to get anything you want most of the time. So just, I think, branch it out a little bit and give us more groups to start with, sort of similar to the Warriors of Chaos. That's the end of my wish list and proposal for a Dwarf rework. Thank you everyone who watched the video. I'm Aravanarian and I'll see you guys next time.